I am Shay, a 39-year-old housewife. After graduating from college, I worked hard to leverage my qualifications and build a career. However, in my late 20s, I was hospitalized with a serious illness that forced me to quit my job. It was a difficult time, but after being discharged from the hospital, I met my current husband through a mutual friend. We fell in love and got married shortly thereafter. When we got married, both my husband and I were 30 years old, and we were eager to start a family. We began trying for a child almost immediately. It wasn't easy. We faced challenges in conceiving, and it took us until our second year of marriage before I finally got pregnant. To our surprise and joy, we found out that we were expecting twins. My husband was overjoyed at the thought of having 2 children at once. During my pregnancy, we spent a lot of time preparing for the arrival of our twins. We bought baby supplies, moved to a bigger house, and excitedly discussed names every day. It was a busy but happy period, filled with anticipation and dreams of our growing family. However, our happiness was short-lived. At 7 months pregnant, I was diagnosed with threatened preterm labor and had to be hospitalized again. I was put on a 24-hour drip and spent my days anxiously praying for the health of my babies. My husband, always busy with his work, rarely visited me in the hospital. Despite my worries in his absence, I managed to hold on until the due date and gave birth to 2 healthy babies. Childcare proved to be far more challenging than I had expected. Not only was I inexperienced as a first-time mother, but I also had to care for 2 infants at once. The biggest issue, however, was that my husband was almost never home. Since the birth of our children, his work had become even busier, with him working overtime nearly every day and frequently going on business trips, even on weekends. I longed for help from my parents, but they lived far away. I had to rely on my in-laws, who could only help occasionally due to their own work commitments. My husband, always citing his work commitments, left most of the housework and childcare to me. I was exhausted from the lack of sleep and felt overwhelmed every day. It puzzled me how my husband's attitude seemed to have changed so drastically since the birth of our twins. While he had been so happy when I got pregnant, it now felt like he had no sense of fatherhood or responsibility. He treated childcare as if it were entirely my problem, not something we should share as parents. I found myself alone day and night, struggling to care for 2 crying babies, often brought to tears by the exhaustion and loneliness. One day, my frustration reached a boiling point. One of the twins had developed a fever, and I was busy nursing him while the other one was fussing. In the midst of this chaos, my husband casually announced that he would be home late because of a party. It wasn't a business-related event, but a private drinking party with a college friend. I couldn't believe he could even consider going out drinking when our child was sick and I was struggling on my own. I glared at him and asked if he could really go out at such a difficult time. He didn't understand why I was upset and simply said, "I don't need dinner tonight, thanks," and started to leave. I grabbed his arm, desperately trying to stop him. When he looked puzzled, I pleaded, "Please come home early today." He asked, "Why?" with genuine confusion, which only irritated me more. For the children's sake, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "Please cancel the party." He pouted and replied, "Why do I have to be so restricted? I have my men's gatherings. You're a housewife, so you should handle the kids. Stop relying on me." No matter how much I begged, I couldn't change his mind. Left alone at home, I wondered what marriage really meant as I struggled to take care of the twins by myself. Since that day, my husband's attitude toward me grew colder. He worked more overtime and spent even less time at home. Even when he was home, we barely spoke, and when I tried to talk to him, he would only give curt replies, often distracted by his phone. As our problems began to unfold, I noticed significant changes in my husband's behavior. He started to distance himself from me and the children, creating an emotional gap that seemed to widen every day. One night, without any explanation, he moved into a different bedroom. The sudden change took me by surprise, and I found myself alone at night, grappling with the emptiness his absence left behind. Our once shared space was now divided, and the closeness we had as a couple seemed to dissolve into thin air. There was no time for us as a couple anymore. Every evening, he would come home late, mumble a few words, and then retreat into his new room, shutting the door behind him. I couldn't understand his actions, and it hurt to see him pulling away without any clear reason. At first, I thought he might be holding a grudge against me for asking him not to attend a drinking party with his colleagues a few weeks ago. I had only made the request out of concern. He had been coming home late more often, and I worried about the toll it was taking on him and our family. Yet, instead of talking it out with me, he seemed to harbor resentment. Or perhaps it wasn't that at all. Maybe there were other issues at work that were stressing him out. He never explained why he was so grumpy and irritable, leaving me to wonder and worry about what was going on in his mind. Initially, I was deeply concerned about these sudden changes. I tried to talk to him, to understand what was bothering him, but he was unresponsive and cold. Each attempt at a conversation was met with monosyllabic answers or silence, and eventually I stopped trying. I was hurt by his distance and his refusal to let me in, but as the days passed, my concern began to wane. I found myself caught up in the overwhelming responsibilities of childcare. With 2 young children to look after, my days were filled with feeding, bathing, playing, and soothing. It was exhausting, both physically and emotionally, and I barely had time to think about my husband's moods. Gradually, I stopped caring as much about his grumpiness and the emotional wall he had built between us. Despite the growing emotional distance between us, life continued. As the children grew older, childcare became easier. I started to fall into a routine, getting used to the daily tasks and the rhythm of caring for the twins. The initial chaos of motherhood began to settle into a more manageable routine, and I found myself feeling more at ease with each passing day. I realized that I was starting to enjoy the time I spent with the kids and the sense of accomplishment that came from managing the household. However, the thought of reclaiming a bit of my own life began to cross my mind. I wondered if it was time to put the kids in daycare and go back to work. After being a housewife for so long, the idea of returning to the workforce and having a life outside of the home was both exciting and daunting. Just as I was considering these possibilities, something unexpected happened one night. After putting the children to bed, I walked into the living room to find my husband sitting at the dining table. His face was somber, and he was staring blankly ahead, lost in thought. It was unusual to see him like this. For months, he had barely acknowledged my presence. But tonight, he seemed different. For the first time in what felt like forever, he looked up at me and spoke first. "I have something to discuss," he said, his voice low and serious. A knot formed in my stomach as I sat down across from him. His tone was ominous, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever he was about to say would change everything. I waited anxiously, trying to brace myself for whatever was coming. Then, with a deep breath, he delivered the news that would shatter my world. "I've fallen in love with someone else, and I want a divorce." I was stunned into silence. His words hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating and surreal. How could this be happening? We had just started to find some semblance of stability in our lives with the twins, and now he was telling me he wanted to leave me for another woman. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mind raced with a million questions, but I was too shocked to speak. As I sat there, numb and disbelieving, my husband began to explain. He admitted that his recent aloofness and distance had been partly because he had been seeing someone else. The confession hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just a recent affair. He revealed that he had been involved with her since I was pregnant. While I was battling the physical and emotional challenges of pregnancy, he was off with another woman. While I was fighting for my life during a difficult delivery and struggling to raise our children, he was busy nurturing a secret relationship. The late nights he claimed were because of work. The business trips he said were unavoidable. They were all lies. He had been with her all along, and I had been too busy, too trusting, or maybe just too naive to see it. A surge of anger and betrayal coursed through me. How could he do this to me? To us? To our family? I wanted to scream at him, to grab him and shake him, to make him feel a fraction of the pain he had caused me. But as I looked at him, sitting there with a strange mix of guilt and resolve in his eyes, I knew that getting angry wouldn't change anything. His love for me was gone, and he had already made his decision to be with his affair partner. Clinging to a man who had chosen someone else would only bring me more pain and heartache. I had to accept the painful truth that our marriage was over. Even if I forced my husband to stay, I knew it would only lead to a life filled with misery for both of us. He would never be content in a relationship held together by obligation rather than genuine love or commitment. The thought of such a hollow existence made my heart grow cold, realizing that pretending to be a happy family for the sake of appearances would only breed resentment and bitterness. I slowly sat back down, feeling the weight of reality pressing down on me. Looking him straight in the eyes, I spoke with a calm but firm resolve. I don't mind getting divorced, but I want to be clear. I will demand alimony and child support. This isn't just about you or me. It's about what's best for the children and ensuring they have what they need. I want to end things cleanly and with dignity. I plan to live with my children, and I'm prepared to go back to work to support us. I've thought this through and have already begun preparing myself to be independent. As long as I can solve the financial aspects, I'll be fine without you. I've accepted that. I watched his reaction carefully, but what he said next stunned me. Why should I have to pay alimony? He asked incredulously, his tone laced with indignation, as if the very idea was offensive to him. I felt a flash of anger and disbelief. How could he not understand? Taking a deep breath to steady myself, I replied, "Because the divorce is your fault. You're the one who had an affair. You're the one who broke the vows we made to each other." He shook his head, a sarcastic smile curling his lips. "No," he countered, his voice full of blame and self-pity. "The divorce is your fault. I wouldn't have cheated if you hadn't been so wrapped up in the kids and ignored me. I needed someone who actually cared about me, who didn't treat me like an afterthought. I had to find someone else to fill that void." His words hit me like a slap in the face. I was momentarily speechless, struggling to comprehend how he could twist the situation to make himself the victim. The sheer selfishness of his statement was staggering. He was a father, yet he spoke as if the care and attention our children needed were a nuisance, a distraction from his own desires. He had left the day-to-day responsibilities of raising the twins entirely to me, barely acknowledging their existence. And now he dared to accuse me of neglect? How could he expect me to pay attention to his needs when he had done nothing to support me or be a real father to our children? I couldn't believe the audacity. Yet, here he was, insisting that he was the one who had been wronged. "I won't pay alimony," he declared, his voice rising in anger. With that, he stormed out of the room, leaving me standing there, shocked and infuriated. A few days passed in tense silence until he called me again. This time his tone was smug, dripping with false confidence. "I'm bringing a lawyer tomorrow, so be ready," he said, clearly trying to intimidate me. I knew then that he had hired a lawyer to fight me over alimony, but I wasn't worried. I had been preparing for this battle, mentally and emotionally steeling myself for whatever was to come. No matter how skilled or aggressive his lawyer might be, I was determined not to lose. I was prepared to fight for my rights and the rights of our children. The next day, as promised, my husband arrived at the house with a woman who introduced herself as a lawyer. There was something off about the way they interacted, a familiarity that went beyond a professional relationship. They seemed unusually close, almost as if they were old friends or more. The woman appeared to be around my age, somewhere in her early 40s. As I studied her face, a vague sense of recognition tugged at my memory, but I couldn't quite place where I had seen her before. Without wasting any time, she walked into the house and handed me a business card. "I'm Rachel, an attorney," she said briskly. "I'm here to demand alimony from you." As I took the card from her, a strange feeling washed over me. Something about her face and her demeanor was unsettlingly familiar. Then, in a sudden moment of clarity, it all came together. I realized who she was and understood exactly what was going on. The pieces of the puzzle snapped into place, revealing a picture I had not expected. Ah, I see how it is, I thought to myself, my mind racing. I now understood the entire situation and knew I could put an end to the charade immediately. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. "All right," I said calmly. "If you're ready for this, I won't hold back." I kept my gaze fixed on the business card, pretending to study it. My husband, mistaking my silence for fear or hesitation, exchanged a triumphant look with the woman. They both seemed so confident, so sure that they had the upper hand. "See," my husband said, his voice full of self-satisfaction. "Since the lawyer says so, you have to pay the money." The woman, still wearing that smug, self-assured smile, nodded in agreement. Feeling a wave of contempt rise within me, I looked directly at her. Her arrogance was infuriating. Her assumption that I would simply roll over and accept the demands insulting. "What a coincidence," I said evenly. "I am also a lawyer." Her smile faltered immediately, her confident expression melting into one of shock and confusion. She blinked, struggling to process what I had just said. I continued, my voice steady and unwavering. "The business card you just gave me is actually mine." Her face turned ashen, her eyes widening in realization. She seemed to be at a loss for words, her mouth opening and closing as if trying to form a response, but unable to find the words. I pressed on, sensing her fear. "Now that I think about it, we have met before, haven't we?" The woman stammered, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Are you possibly?" she muttered, her gaze fixed on my face, recognition slowly dawning. Beads of sweat began to form on her forehead, and she looked increasingly uncomfortable. My husband, still clueless about what was happening, watched our exchange with growing panic. He didn't understand the turn of events, but as soon as I showed him the business card with my name on it, his face turned pale and he exhaled sharply, as if all the air had been knocked out of him. "Yes," I said, my tone matter of fact. "I used to be a lawyer about 10 years ago. I worked at a law firm, and this woman," I gestured towards her, "came for a free consultation back then. No wonder her face seemed familiar to me. I remember the details vividly now. At the time, she had come in seeking advice on repaying her debts. I had listened to her story, empathized with her situation, and given her some professional guidance. She seemed quite distressed back then, so I had offered her my business card, telling her to come back if she needed more help. But she never returned to the office, and I eventually forgot about her. Later, due to a serious illness, I was hospitalized for a long period and had to temporarily deregister as a lawyer. During my recovery, many things from my past slipped from my mind as I focused on getting better. Seeing her here now, pretending to be a lawyer, was a shock. I never expected to meet her again, and certainly not under these circumstances. She probably didn't recognize me at first either, given that 10 years had passed and I had lost weight and changed my hairstyle since then. I stepped closer to her, my voice low and serious. "It's illegal to pretend to be a lawyer without a license. Would you care to explain the situation?" She looked terrified now, her eyes darting between me and my husband, searching for a way out. In a desperate move, she clung to my husband's arm, stepping back as if to shield herself. My husband, realizing that their deceit had been exposed and that there was no escape from the truth, began to confess everything in a rush, his words tumbling out in a frantic, jumbled mess. What I heard from both of them left me astounded. The so-called lawyer was actually my husband's mistress. They had concocted this entire plan, hoping to intimidate me into dropping my demands for alimony and child support, thinking that I wouldn't be able to fight back. They had underestimated me, assuming that I was still the same woman they had both known before, unaware that I had found a new strength in myself. As I listened to their desperate explanations and excuses, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I had feared this confrontation, dreaded what might come of it. But now, standing here with the truth laid bare before me, I realized that I had nothing to fear. They had played their hand, and it had failed spectacularly. I was no longer bound by the past or their manipulations. I was free, and as I turned to walk away, leaving them to grapple with the consequences of their actions, I knew that I would be just fine. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. I was ready to move forward and start a new chapter in my life, one where I could finally be true to myself and my children, free. The mistress had kept the business card I gave her during the free consultation, thinking it might be useful someday. The card had my maiden name on it, which is why she never realized it was from the wife of her affair partner. When my husband, anxious about the possibility of having to pay me compensation, confided in her, she assured him not to worry and promised to handle the situation. Seizing the opportunity, she pretended to be a lawyer and used my old business card to make her story more convincing. My husband, upon seeing the business card, didn't even bother to verify the details or the name on it. He assumed everything was in order and felt reassured, believing his mistress had his back. He had no idea I used to be a lawyer myself. Although I had told him about my past career when we first met, he dismissed it as a joke. Back then, I wasn't practicing law, and he never took me seriously. Since it didn't seem important at the time, I never corrected his misconception. The mistress and my husband concocted this plan, thinking they could intimidate me into paying compensation by posing as a legal team. When the two of them arrived at my house, the mistress was dressed in a business suit, trying to look the part. She confidently introduced herself as his attorney, brandishing my old business card as if it were proof of her credentials. My husband stood beside her, trying to look serious but clearly nervous. I could hardly believe the absurdity of what I was seeing. Here they were, trying to scam me with such a transparent ruse, not realizing they were making fools of themselves. As they presented their case, I could only smile wryly at their naive attempt. Once they had finished their little performance, I decided to end the charade. "You do realize," I said, my voice calm but firm, "that you will be paying both the compensation and child support, right?" My words hit them like a brick wall. My husband's face turned pale, and he immediately dropped to his knees. "Shay, please forgive me," he pleaded, his voice trembling. "Let's not get divorced," he added, clasping his hands together in a gesture of desperation. I was taken aback by his sudden switch in allegiance. Even with his mistress standing right there, he was now begging me to forgive him. I glanced at the woman beside him. Her expression had turned from confident to furious. She glared at him with a look that could kill, her eyes burning with rage and betrayal. I understood her feelings. She had gone to great lengths, pretending to be a lawyer and fabricating this whole scheme, all for him. And now, in the face of failure, he had thrown her under the bus without a second thought. My husband seemed oblivious to the storm brewing beside him. He continued to cling to me, shouting, "Shay, I need you. Let's be a family again. The kids need a father too, right? So please, spare me the compensation." His words were pitiful, his desperation obvious. It was clear he didn't care about me or the kids. He just wanted to avoid paying the money he owed. I felt a wave of nausea rise within me, disgusted by his selfishness and lies. "It's too late," I said coldly, my patience wearing thin. "Neither I nor the kids need a scumbag like you. Leave with that so-called lawyer. No, that fraudster, right now." My husband's eyes widened in shock. He opened his mouth to protest, but before he could utter a word, the mistress grabbed him by the collar. With surprising strength and fury, she yanked him back and began dragging him toward the door. He tried to resist, but she was relentless. Outside, I could hear her shouting at him, her voice shrill with anger, while he screamed in pain and panic. It must have been quite a scene for the neighbors. After they left, I wasted no time in taking legal action. I sent them both certified letters. To my husband, I demanded a divorce, alimony, and child support, He had to face the consequences of his actions and the reality of our broken marriage. To the mistress, I demanded compensation for the emotional distress and suffering she had caused me by meddling in our relationship. In the aftermath, my husband's life fell apart. Depressed and struggling, he tried to focus on earning money to fulfill his obligations. But things only got worse. His mistress, now his ex-mistress, wasn't done with him. Feeling betrayed and enraged, she stormed into his workplace one day and exposed their affair to everyone there. The scandal spread like wildfire, ruining his reputation and leading to his dismissal. Already in financial trouble and burdened with debts, he had no choice but to take up a job as a day laborer, working under a much younger boss and barely making ends meet. As for the mistress, she found herself in an even worse situation. She had quit her job, believing she would marry my husband and start a new life with him. But after our confrontation and my compensation demands, she was drowning in debt. The last time I saw her, she was dressed garishly, walking arm in arm with an older man. She was likely heading to work at a girls' bar, try to earn money any way she could. It seemed like a fitting end for someone who thought they could deceive me and come out unscathed. Meanwhile, I decided to take charge of my own life again. I re-registered with the Bar Association and found a job at a law firm. I arranged for daycare for my kids and returned to the legal profession. Although the long hiatus posed some challenges, I felt invigorated by the work and the opportunity to help those in need. I wanted to show my children what it meant to live independently, with integrity and pride. And so, I moved forward, leaving behind the drama and pain of the past. Thank you for staying with me until the end of my story. I hope you found it enlightening. Please subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye for now.